I'm Sam,
I'm Maggie.
and we're working on-the-go crowdsourcing, Libero, the delivery project. So, what's the goal of our project? Uh, the goal of our project is to make these on-the-go delivery tasks convenient enough for people to participate in, because there's very low incentivization in on-the-go systems, and if people feel like the tasks involved, the things they're asked to do, are too involved, too inconvenient, they just won't do them, and the systems become unsustainable, unusable. So we're trying to do two things. First, find exactly what's inconvenient, and second, figure out how to address that. So what's the motivation of the So what's the motivation? A big part of the motivation is that these kinds of systems are really useful, and they won't work unless we can get the convenience down to an acceptable level for actually useful everyday tasks that are less trivial than kind of the things we've seen in controlled experiments so far in on-the-go crowdsourcing. Uh, yeah.
And this quarter, our primary goal is to isolate the most challenging portions of on the go delivery tasks and then to develop well supported design arguments on how to mitigate these inconveniences. And in order to do so, we are looking to create a straightforward and easy to understand delivery application that can be used for need finding initially and then to test our design arguments. If successful, this quarter we would be able to develop on-the-go platforms that are convenient enough for our end users to use for common delivery tasks. And in terms of researchers, we want a set of well-supported guidelines on principles for architects for future on-the-go platforms.
Yeah, so our design goals. So what's the user problem? So you kind of have two users to keep in mind in these kinds of situations. You have the helpers and the requesters. The helpers being the people who are doing the tasks, the requesters being the people who are asking. So the problem is that helpers feel as though on-the-go tasks are convenient. They should feel as though the on-the-go tasks are convenient enough to execute without disrupting the routine. So it's just kind of a trivial thing to participate in. And the requesters should feel as though it's still worth carrying out the task and that it's convenient enough to request and that the task gets completed within a reasonable timeline and that it will, with a reasonable probability, get accomplished. So what's our design argument? Last quarter, we weren't really able to nail down any concrete design arguments because our prototype came out pretty late and it's very difficult to need find in this domain without actually having people using the app. But we have a few potential ones. So our first is that to improve the viability of on-the-go systems, we could shift some of the inconvenience of tasks from the helper onto the requester. So since the requester is already getting this service done for free, maybe we could advise him to meet the helper at a more convenient location or something along those lines. Another design argument is that potentially if we provide contextual information about a task to the helper carrying it out, so for example, if you're asked to pick up groceries, like celery or something in a grocery store, we could tell you exactly where the celery is in the grocery store, and that would decrease the inconvenience by a lot. And you might actually, where you weren't before willing to do it, decide you have the time. So the last design argument that I'll talk about is that we're thinking about splitting the task among various players within the system, and that would lower the individual inconvenience to a point where it becomes viable. So this kind of goes back to the relay problem, where if you have a bunch of people walking around, maybe we can have one person hand off the item, and then it's very small disruption for each individual person, but the task gets done. Yeah, so who would we test on? How will we recruit? The plan is to use DTR members at first because they're pretty used to these kinds of payments among each other, and it's just an easier group to start with. And then after we have some kind of a prototype that we're pretty confident with, we'll move on to broader studies like we've seen with, potentially larger groups of people from the broader student population at Northwestern.
So now we'll demonstrate our technology. Right now we have an iOS app called Libero, in which users can request coffee, which then sends a request to someone else near a coffee location to deliver it. So you can choose the type of coffee you want, the size, and also the time that you need it delivered by. And the app will notify users who cross into a geofence close to a coffee store. So if they're nearby, then they can help pick up the coffee and deliver it to the person who needs it. So we have this Swift front end and then a Node.js back end using an MLab instance for our database. By the end of the quarter, we also want to implement event logging so we can get statistics when it comes time to interpret the results of our studies. So we know how many requests were sent out and how many were accepted.
And then research goals. So what research questions will we attempt to answer this quarter? The first question, before we can really address anything else, is what aspects of on-the-go systems are the most inconvenient to potential users? So as a helper, what's the hardest part of the system? And then after we have some idea what the hardest parts are, then our second research question is how can we address and mitigate these barriers to convenience, these inconvenience barriers? And then additional questions relating kind of to the incentivization side of the problem, which, why would a responder accept a task? And how do we encourage more responders to accept tasks? So why are these questions important to focus on now? Well, by better understanding these core characteristics of our research area, we can make more informed decisions on where to focus for the research. So it's hard to design arguments. We can't really come up with design arguments unless we have these research questions kind of thought about and addressed. What are your hypotheses? So first, that shifting the burden to the responder will increase the likelihood for a responder to complete a task. And second, that responders might accept tasks if they feel good about helping their peers or if they feel like they will reap benefits from the system in the future. So yeah, kind of our hypotheses relate to our not supported design arguments and also to potential reasons that people would use the system. How will we confirm or reject? Well, we'll conduct controlled experiments with different features and observe how they influence participation in ways that affect system outcomes. And then we'll follow the study with a post-survey to understand users' perceived utility, disruption, and reasoning for using the app. Okay, I think we're recording.
It's like that little square.